the second of our Battles of Beta Garmon rundown. This time taking on the Legiones Auxilia within the book, as well as the more generic unit editions for the Solar Auxilia. Now, I'm actually really happy, as an overview of these, really happy that they've been added to the Solar Auxilia. It's something that, in the current state of the game, I don't think they fully work as a primary army. There are ways to, and this is one of my main armies that I play. I've probably played about a quarter of the games with them. I've got Iron Warriors, Auxilia, Militia, Mech. Probably played about a quarter of the games with the Solar. I really like them. I don't think they quite work as a primary detachment. Now, what this is going to do, the Legiones Auxilia, is give buffs to them based on your primary detachment being an Astartes force. So my Auxilia were always the Thorikites, and they're represented in this book, and each legion gets their own Auxilia. Legiones rule, excellent, and it ties in very nicely to both their state in the game, as well as how I think it's going to increase the amount of people that take Solar Auxilia, because it'll highlight them as an allied detachment, which is a much more friendly, achievable way of getting into them, rather than being like, okay, I'm going to have to paint 300 Solar Auxilia so that they don't all die across a game. Now, the Solar Auxilia, we'll start with the Legiones Auxilia, obviously. They're part of an allied detachment. They can't be used alongside Shattered Legions, Black Shields, and essentially you gain the fellow warriors, unless you've already got better, to your Astartes Legion. So anytime anyone's going to be playing an allied detachment of Solar Auxilia, this is going to be how you're going to do it anyway, because it's no more expensive than you were paying regardless. You get the benefit just immediately as if you were within 12 of a friendly model with the Legion Astartes rule that your primary detachment is. If you fail a morale check, instead of falling back, you get pinned. That's a very good rule. It makes you stick around a lot longer. You don't have to worry about them running off objectives, things like that. Now, because they become pinned, they won't any longer contest or score an objective. Although you will be body blocking it, it does mean that you stick around, you're there for further turns. It's definitely a benefit. If you position in such a way, you can still deny that objective to your opponent by just being there and stopping them from getting within range of the objective, especially with smart piling moves, if you spread out in the right way. So start thinking about your positioning of your Solar, I would say, if they're contesting an objective or scoring an objective already. Think about your positioning so that when your opponent assaults you and you consolidate in, you can still body block that objective. Because if they assault you, you now back up. And if they don't assault you, they can't have scored it anyway. So their primary objective when you're pinned will have been to assault you at that point, to clear you off that objective. So I think it's a very good rule. Dependable. And that is one of the things that Solar Auxilia are anyway. They've got access to Leadership 10 through the HQ choices, and then the command vox that can be on the tertio sections. If you have your commander in there, that spreads that leadership to anyone with the vox, even if that commander is off the table. So long as they are attached to a vox squad, they can use that your army can use that leadership if they've got a vox, which is an incredible rule, and this just really plays into it. If you do fail that leadership 10, you just get pinned. So the only way you are being forced off objectives, even though it reduces your firepower, even though you failing a leadership check, they've got to kill you all. And with how you pull models from where you want them rather than from the closest to the enemy, it means that you can selectively pull the ones that will make it hard for your opponent to get to that objective, or stop you denying them at worst case. So really, really good. Like that addition to the Solar Auxilia just as a base rule. And it plays into them. Obviously, it doesn't help them with survivability, but the downside of Solar as a primary detachment, I think, is made up for. It's largely output. It's that you don't kill enough of the Legion's forces that you play. that on turn 3, 4, they've still got most of their army and they've been killing you all game. If you've got your legions as a primary detachment, you can make up some of that AP2 loss. So I don't think they needed a boost of like survivability that much. So because your primary detachment covers for the weakness that makes them die. Now that's a bit of a general one. Let's get into the actual benefits that you get Legion Auxilia of. So the first one is the Dark Angels. And the Dark Angels trait, Unity of Mind. So Solar Auxilia have a Tertio rule. If one unit in the Tertio is reacting with a shooting attack, any others, I believe it's within 3, in the same Tertio with the Tertio rule, also get to react either with a movement reaction or a shooting-based reaction. Unity of Mind spreads that to once per phase, a unit composed of Dark Angels can be part of that Legiones Auxilia reaction, which is incredibly good, I think. It means your opponent can't pick on a weak squad near an objective. Say you've got a 10-man Lavs Rifle squad or a whatever size. They can't pick on that squad to remove them if you've got a Dark Angel squad which has a lot of firepower nearby. It means that to avoid shooting that Legiones Auxilia unit, which will be on the objective, they'll have to shoot the Astartes unit and get return fired anyway. So incredibly good, plays with the synergy of the army, and I do really like it as a reaction. Yes, you count as reacted. Who didn't see that coming? Doesn't take up an additional reaction. So combined with Tertio reactions, you could potentially have 4 units in total shooting back for the cost of 1 reaction. And yes, like a lot of the time they're going to be Las Rifles, Volkite Chargers. It all adds up, and for the cost of 1 reaction, incredibly good. Next, we've got the Legiones Auxilia Emperor's Children. What this rule does is, if one of your models with Legiones Auxilia Emperor's Children is killed as part of a shooting attack, all models in the unit with Legiones Auxilia Emperor's Children gain the Hammer of Wrath 1 special rule until the end of the controlling player's next turn. Now, on the face of it, that it's not brilliant because you're only strength 3, you're going to have long charges. Movement 6 isn't great for you're not getting any pluses to your charge to get more models into base contact. However, it does start adding to a few buffs that you can do to the Auxilia. And I'll just flick to the ones which I'm talking about. So you've got the Feral Pattern Cohort, essentially, which they're given Fear 1 for 25 points a unit, which is quite expensive, but you gain, obviously, Fear 1, which is an incredibly good rule. You also gain Counter Attack with that, but you must charge. Now, although it's not adding to your output, getting a few wounds, having weight of numbers into your opponent, maybe with bayonets as well, so that you strength 4 with the Auxilia, to add all of that together, they're going to be on minuses to their charge or to their leadership if you've suffered a wound. And it will just compound into more damage to your opponent in that turn and just help you win as a lowly Auxilia against maybe a tactical squad more than anything. It's probably not worth assaulting, regardless of that Hammer of Wrath, anything better than a tactical squad. Heavy weapon squad even, maybe, if you really want to chance the incoming fire. But it's just a little cherry on top. It's not as good as that Dark Angels reaction, granted, but it's at least a bonus, and yes, it's on the lower side of it. I'm not going to gild the lily there. Next, we've got the Iron Warriors. You got Shot Shrouded. Basically, all the Thoricite Auxilia are just so inured to being in the trenches. You don't take any negatives to your leadership as part of Pinningock and Cussif. And you're going to largely have leadership 10 or at least 9 if you like sort of cheaping out on your Warlord across your army. You're going to get pinned instead of falling back anyway. I don't care too much if I'm taking pinning checks at lower than that. Yes, it might help out situationally, but compared to some of the other ones, like the Dark Angels one that we've already gone through, it's, to me, not nearly as good. It's more towards the Emperor's Children one, where it's situationally okay. And yeah, not one of the greatest ones, but a benefit nonetheless. And it plays into the Iron Warriors' nature, and is at least very fluffy for what they do, whereas the Emperor's Children, there'll obviously be a fluff reason there, but this obviously fits, to me at least, more specifically to what the Iron Warriors and their Auxilia are all about and trying to do. So I can see where they were coming from, just I don't think it plays out in game as good as some of the other benefits that you get for the Legiones Auxilia. In the White Scars, you get the Eye of the Storm, and essentially this is them setting up a bulwark behind the White Scars units. A unit containing one or more models with the Auxilia White Scars and Tertio special rules, so it will only be your infantry. If you're in the controlling player's deployment zone, your own deployment zone, or within 6 inches of an objective, you gain a 6-up Feel No Pain. Now, you can already do that with a medic being a 6-up. However, the real benefit of this, and medics are very cheap to get that 6-up, where this comes into it a bit more, I think, is if half your models are within 6 inches of an objective, you can increase that Feel No Pain by 1 to a 5-up. And that, I think, tips the medic save into being worthwhile. It's going to tie in to your failing leaderships becoming pinning, so that you're sticking around near an objective, which is where you're going to want to be. You can have a 5-up Feel No Pain, which is much better. That the 6-up is just, the amount of times I've had it and used it, it's just not been worth it. I've just completely written it off at this point. Whereas a 5-up being double as likely is so much better. I think it's a good special rule. Obviously, situationally useful, means if you're in your deployment zone, you don't need objectives if you're not going to move out there. But when you are on an objective, that +1 with a medic going to a 5-up, really, really good. On to the Space Wolves, we've got the Ears of Morkai. No model may make cover saves or shrouded damage mitigation saves against wounds inflicted by shooting attacks, which are made by models with the Legiones Auxilia Space Wolves special rule as part of a reaction. So that's going to come into it, obviously, a lot. You're a shooting army, a shooting allied detachment. You can take Lehman Rush Vanquishers as fast attack choices, which fall under the allied detachment and gain this special rule. So Vanquishers with a las cannon on the hull, coaxial autocannon, and a Vanquisher cannon, which is brutal 2, strength 8, AP 2, which is an incredibly good tank anyway. Ignoring shrouded saves when someone shrouds, and already doubling them out to ignore Feel No Pains, can't take cover saves. Essentially, when you fire at them, they can only have their invulnerable saves, and it's brutal 2. Really, really good. This is one of the better ones, I would say, just across the board for what you were taking. Even if you just have it in your back pocket and you've just got las rifle squads or Volkite squads, it means that it just magnifies your damage that bit more. I really like it. I'd recommend it wholeheartedly. The Imperial Fist Steadfast rule ties into them really, really nicely. It's a very, very good rule as well. So if you've got Legiones Auxilia Imperial Fists, you've got the line subtype as well. You increase all of your cover saves by 1. So it means your Ruins cover save goes to a 4-up. Your Woods or Obscured cover saves go to a 5-up, making it Heresy 1 levels of cover, which Heresy 2 cover isn't that great. Heresy 1 is a completely different story. I know it's only 1 point, but saving half of your wounds when normally you would be just ripped through by heavy bolters is incredibly good. It being only on the line subtype, I would recommend here the Solar Pattern Cohort, which makes your Veletaris line. Unless obviously you want to take loads of las rifles, but having Veletaris squads as line, getting them access to this as well is just incredibly good. Recommend it fully because it's just as much line as you can anyway. Having BS4 on those Veletaris and now having this additional to your cover save, very, very good. You've got Night Lords with the combat haze. Essentially, you were immune to effects of fear because you were just inured to it. You don't care. Night Lords have done worse to you, and you've seen worse throughout all the Crusade, so you just don't care. That is immediately like fairly good. Now, on top of that, you gain the Rage 2 special rule for the duration of assault phase with at least a single model in the unit begins within 12 of a friendly model with the Fear special rule, basically. So if you are within 12 inches of a Night Lord's model with Fear, so that'll come off on your Trophies of Judgment, any Terror squads if you run in, or Night Raptor squads, any Sergeants when you're running Terror Assault, you gain Rage 2. Again, that will stack nicely with the Feral Pattern Cohort, which is this one here, where you gain Fear 1 and just get that fear, so there's no unfearing unit, or unfeared units in your army. There's no weak links where your opponent's leadership won't be reduced. And getting Rage 2 to just get more and more attacks. Although, obviously, with the Emperor's Children, you will strike before the opponent and hit automatically. If you have Bayonets, your Rage 2 will benefit you more with the strength characteristic. And I think it's probably about 50-50. But I just like the addition of the immunity to fear here, whereas the Emperor's Children doesn't have that secondary benefit. So I would put it higher within the balance of power that we're looking at when we're looking at these Legiones Auxilia. So next on to the Blood Angels. When you are in combat, again, this is going to tie into the Feral Pattern Cohort, I think. That any time you're going to be looking at combat for Solar Auxilia, I would be thinking the Feral Pattern Cohort to get that fear. So the Blood Angels, you get Glory of Humanity. If you are within 6 inches of a Legiones Astartes Blood Angel, you increase your attack characteristic by 1 when you're locked in combat. So you just increase it by 1, right? Increasing attacks, always good. It means that a charging squad of 20 las rifle sections with bayonets will get 1 base, 1 for charging, 1 additional attack for this. So you're going to be getting 60 attacks with that strength 4. Nothing to be sniffed at. Obviously, don't expect from any of these where I'm saying, oh, it's combat, don't expect the world off your Solar Auxilia, but it's that nice little addition which will help them do some work. And yeah, it's a decent benefit. Feral Pattern Cohort recommended again. And if you stack it onto your Sharonite Ogryns here, as well as one of the benefits is that whereas in the Night Lords or Emperor's Children, it requires the charge. It's a special rule that requires the charge. And say like if you had this on Sharonite Ogryns for the previous 2, that can just be denied, and that's an obvious place to deny. Whereas a normal las rifle section, you're never really going to get denied, especially in a Blood Angels army where they'll deny somewhere else. This, however, if you stack that +1 attack characteristic onto Sharonite Ogryns, which are already... The downside of Sharonite Ogryns is that they've got no assault transport. It's not that the unit is so terrible in itself. This will just compound them being fairly decent in combat because it affects them. And if you've got a Blood Angels character around, get them into combat as well and do some work. So next we go into the Iron Hands. Iron Hands. When you fail a morale check due to shooting, instead of falling back with the normal rules, you suffer D3 automatic wounds with no saves of any kind allowed, except for damage mitigation rolls, which you can take. So potentially worth taking a med. No, it's a 6-up save. Just let them die. But you take D3 automatic wounds and just act as normal. Sort of weirdly, I would have liked to see this. Not weirdly, I suppose, but I would have liked to see this as the Iron Warriors one as well, where they just like execute a couple of Auxilia. I think it fits Iron Hands as well in that they like give them electroshock to the brain. So maybe it should have been like the Iron Warriors if they're within 6 of the Auxilia. That's when this can pop off for them. But really good rule for the Iron Hands, maintains the output, so is worth it, even when you consider that they've already got a special rule in the Legiones Auxilia to mean that they just get pinned instead. And yeah, I really like it because it will mean that they still contest and still score an objective instead of being pinned and just completely ignoring the squad other than the body blocking objectives. World Eaters, we get the Butcher's Due. When making a shooting attack, targeting units which are falling back, or have previously had one or more models removed as casualties, the Auxilia add one to their rolls to hit. Now, this will just compound on itself, so if you just fire 2 units and have taken 1 wound off, it doesn't have to be the Astartes that take off that wound. So it's just a +1 to hit after you've already damaged a unit. I like it because it's less tied to the Legion for a Legion that wouldn't care about the Auxilia or think about working with them. So I like how it's not tied together in that way, but it also is a decent benefit because coming to hit on 3s with your las rifles, even at strength 6, or with your Lehman Russ Vanquishers, or hitting on 2s if you were a Veletaris Storm, all incredibly good. You just need to do that wound first, and I like it a lot as a rule in how it's set up and its operation. Auxiliary Ultramarines, we've got the Combined Arms special rule, and this one on the flip side to the World Eaters will be that if you basically work together a bit more, everyone benefits. Essentially, if your Legiones Auxilia cause a wound or like cause a casualty in your opponents, your Legiones Astartes will only get snapshot at as part of a reaction if they assault the same unit. So Auxilia shoot one unit, Astartes charge the same unit, the Astartes will only get snapshot at. It works really well with Combined Arms. It works really well with the Loctorus Storm and Suzerain both being really good assaulting units. It does, I suppose, increase the likelihood of the hold the line. But it's a really good flavoursome rule for both Ultramarines and how they work and how they would work with their Auxilia, as well as being solid in game, I think. So, because no one's going to waste a return fire largely against your Auxilia when there's Ultramarines about. I mean, if you've got a good Ultramarine shooting squad, someone's not going to return fire with their las cannons if you just plink a couple of wounds off them with las rifles. It just doesn't tend to happen. So it's a solid addition to those rules for the Ultramarines and Auxilia. For the Death Guard, you get Mantle of Death, a very fluffy rule for the Death Guard Auxilia. They are hurt by poisoned and flesh-baned weapons on 1 less than they would be normally. They also reroll failed dangerous terrains. Now, how actually useful that is, I'm not too sure. I think, sort of falls into the same thing as, say, fortifications. Iron Warriors used to have Rack and Ruin, which in Heresy 1, which only worked on fortifications. Now, it would only be Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors themselves that had fortifications, so you never really got to use it. I think this is a little bit the same, where most of the time it's going to be Death Guard who have a lot of poisoned, and your own Auxilia get benefits against that poison. So I don't see it coming off too much. The dangerous terrain is a little bit more, specifically, I would say, against Dark Angels. Oh, what's it called? Dreadwing, Rite of Wars, which cause the entire board to be dangerous terrain. So, or in the entire board to be difficult and certain features to be dangerous within 6 inches of a deployed piece. Now, I know that's very situational, but it's the best usage I could think for this Mantle of Death. So I don't think it's a very good one. I think it's a flavorful one. And it is what it is here, right? Next, we've got the Thousand Suns. And the Thousand Suns Psyshock is, if you're Astartes, Thousand Suns suffer perils when within 12 inches of an Auxilia. Instead of your Astartes taking the wounds, your Auxilia can take the wounds instead. And they also gain Adamantium Will 6+. Now, this I think is very useful because those perils, I know anyone playing Thousand Suns, those perils pop up far too often, right? And wouldn't you like to have a 5-point body to take those wounds rather than your expensive Thousand Sun squad that you also don't want to get diminished as you take more and more perils? I think it's a good one for Thousand Suns, whether it's the best. And it also represents like the Alakites taking the wounds that are just there, like when the Magnus forces his way into the throne room, loads of Alakites get sacrificed to provide that power. And this is sort of along the same lines, just obviously not on galactic altering scale, except if your games are galactic altering scale. Is it the best thing ever? I'm not sure. I'd like to have seen more like esoteric witchy-poo rules within those Auxilia themselves, because surely not all Psykers on Tizca were like sturdy enough to have made it into the Astartes, is how I sort of think of it. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments if it actually, because I thought it was like most of the population were Psykers. Are the Legiones Auxilia able to be made up of Psykers, or what do you think anyway? And let me know whether I'm right or wrong with the population statistics of Tizca. Then we've got Legiones Auxilia, Sons of Horus, the War Master's Spite. If you're Astartes, Sons of Horus declare a charge against a unit which had previously had an Auxilia unit shooting attack it and kill a model, in the same turn, the Astartes get +2 to their charge distance roll. It ties into what the Legion wants to be doing now. Definitely works together with that in a good way. I think it's a good benefit. Some more output for either of them may have been better, but it's supporting what your Astartes want to do. And for a 60-point squad to be able to place this rule, and that's a lot of las rifle, it's 10 las rifles in 60 points. They can be strength 6. You've got a chance of doing like 1 wound, right? So just be able to try and place those benefits about. Just get markers, right? Just get markers so that you know when that Legiones Auxilia has done it. And I think it's a good rule that fits in with the Legion. The Auxilia and armor units, we see them portrayed working together with the War Master's Legion. So I think it is a good rule that fits. Not the best one ever, but pretty good. Pretty good. Word Bearers, we get Cult Demagogues. I think this one fits as well. If a unit of Auxilia starts within 12 inches of a model with Astartes, you gain Fleet 2 and Crusader. Crusader being roll 2d6 for sweeps and pick the highest. Both of it helps you make it into assaults, and it helps you if you do win that assault, it helps you run down Astartes, which, because you're lower initiative, you do have a bit of a harder time doing. Now, is it the best thing in the world? No. Are you going to be winning many combats? No. I don't think it's great. I think it fits with that like cult horde demagogue thing. Definitely think you want to stack it with the feral warriors because they're like savage horde of cultists. Again, don't think it's the best thing ever because it's an Auxilia based combat thing. Now, maybe your life wards can benefit from this a lot. Maybe your companions, if you don't select a HQ choice with leadership 10 with a solar marshal. But I think it's okay. It's certainly not as bad as some of the other ones that we've had, but it's not an active benefit all the time like some of them has been. I think actually the best one up to now, like Ultramarines, Dark Angels, things like that. Salamanders, we've got Promethean Wards. A unit containing one or more models with Auxilia Salamanders increase its cover save received against shooting attacks which draw line of sight through a Salamander's model to a roll of 4+, so long as that intervening is off a Salamander's model, right? Incredibly good with survivability, like incredibly good. It means that heavy bolters aren't just absolutely decimating you, which if you've not played Solar yet and you're just like thinking about getting into Solar as an allied detachment, you might have been writing off just how much damage heavy bolters can do to humans. And that's because you get an armor save of 3 up, which a heavy bolter doesn't ignore. As soon as you start playing Solar, those heavy bolters just destroy you. And the incidental wounds as well, like grav guns. Who knew they were AP4? Well, every Solar Auxilia player out there, because they're AP4, they ignore the fact that you've got heavy armor because you don't get to reroll a save that you don't get. This will give you at least a cover save, and he's very, very good. Raven Guard, Spearhead of Liberation. And this is actually a bit of it took me a few times of reading this to fully get it, as well as I suppose the Alpha Legion one. So a unit composed entirely of models with Auxilia Raven Guard. If you can draw a line of sight with at least a single model to a friendly unit within 24 that is Raven Guard, Astartes, in the primary detachment specifically, though I don't know how you can't ally with yourself, and I don't believe there's any Marine optional detachments, so I don't know how you would get Raven Guard outside that primary. But anyway, Solar within 24 and draw line of sight to an Astartes, increase their leadership by 1 to a maximum of 10. Now, what that does is allow you to take a companion section, which is leadership 9 for their sergeant, and turn it into leadership 10, so you can then get access to companion squads with plasma guns, melter guns, along with the Tertio special rule. On the face of it, it doesn't appear that brilliant because you're like, oh, my Solar Marshal already has leadership 10, why do I care? It's what it unlocks because you don't need to take that Solar Marshal to get Lord Marshal, Solar Marshal, to get leadership 10. So that is, I think, what this is most useful for, is boosting your leadership, unlocking another option because of that. And that other option, the companion squad. 2 wounds, refractor fields. They've all got melter bombs. They can all take plasmas or melters. And they can be up to 30 of them with a command vox in there, so you don't need to waste one of your troop squad selections in your tertio to get a command vox. It all just ties really nicely. So I really like this Spearhead of Liberation rule because of that, because it just unlocks the list a lot more compared to like a more standard build in an allied detachment of Legiones Auxilia. Finally, we've got the Auxilia Alpha Legion. Diversionary Host, you've got basically Diversionary Host is if the enemy targets your Astartes primary detachment, and there is also an Auxilia with this that is within 12 of that targeted unit, the firing unit, so your enemy as the Solar player, God, it's hard to explain, the firing unit must take a leadership check. If they fail that leadership, they fire at the Auxilia instead of the Astartes. So easiest way to do this, have your Auxilia right in front of your Astartes, so they'll always be able to draw a line of sight to both of them, and use them as a screen. And with leadership being lesser in this edition than it was in previous, it'll actually trigger a fair amount of times. I'm not going to say it's going to happen all the time, but it's another addition to your little bag of tricks, along with like your advanced reaction, you being 2 inches further away, things like that. All these little Alpha Legion things, and it's one of the things that stacks up again and can essentially disrupt. Like, imagine your the las cannon squad firing at those las rifles instead of your glorious Alpha Legionaries. Really good special rule. Really like its fluff and how it ties into the army, and how the Alpha Legion would be using the Auxilia. Like, if you read Legion, they're like tied in and no one knows what's going on. And I think this just builds into that. So I really, really like this special rule. So the next section we get onto is the new units and rules for units that we find within the book. And more generic, it can be applied to Auxilia primary detachments, as well as the Legiones Auxilia allied detachments that we found previously in this section. Now, the first things we come across is a new cohort doctrine. And this you will take instead of, say, the Solar Doctrine, that's the one that unlocks Veletaris' troops, the Feral Doctrine, Penal Troopers, things like that. And here we have the Reconnaissance Pattern Cohort. A detachment using the cohort may select Auxilia Hermes Light Sentinel Squadrons as troops. Solar Auxilia Light Sentinel Squadrons selected as compulsory troops gain line. And Veletaris Assault Squadrons gain outflank. Now, there isn't actually a Veletaris Assault Squadron that's included here. Like, could be a placeholder, but like, word on the street is it's referring to the Hermes Veletaris Squadron that I flicked up. That's going to be the second Sentinal type that we go through. Until that point, it needs an errata, right, of those words, but apparently it is what it is. Mistake in the book we can all go crazy about, or just get on with our lives. Aetheon Heavy Sentinel Squadrons may include up to 4 additional Aetheon Heavy Sentinels instead of up to 2. It's certainly a thing, whether or not you'll want to do it, to get a Sentinel Squadron that big that can be pinned down so much, but obviously it'll get more into your list if that's the way that you want to go. A detachment using this cohort doctrine may not include more than a single Auxilia armoured tertio. They're where you're going to be getting your Leman Russ battle tanks. So they tend to be one of the better things in the list for your damage output. And as we go through it, Sentinels, I don't think, are going to often be where you find a greater damage output. A detachment using it may not include more than a single artillery tertio. That's more with Medusas and Basilisks having been completely shelved by the by the Rending 6 that they've got. That's just is what it is. I don't think anyone was taking multiple, right? And if you did want to take multiple, there's an actual cohort doctrine for that. The compulsory troops with line. Now, they are the Light Sentinels. Ignore me. Right, let's get on to the Light Sentinels. Rather than talking about whether or not they're good with line, let's get into whether they are good. And obviously, we can then talk and sort of break down a little bit more whether I think line is a particularly appropriate place to have this. So the Hermes Light Sentinel Squadron, we've got 50 points for for 2 Hermes Light Sentinels. They are movement 10, weapon skill, ballistic skill 3, strength, toughness 5, 2 wounds, so they're not getting double out by las cannons because of the toughness 5, initiative 3, 1 attack, leadership 7, and a 4-up save. They've got las pistol, void armor, and Hermes Light Sentinel as a rule, which gives you a multi-laser, and when you run, you gain shrouded 5-up until the start of your next turn. So that's against every piece of incoming fire, and meaning that you won't have to use a reaction to gain that shrouded 5-up. You've got skirmish as a base, so +1 to your cover save. which is useful at all times, right? Anything that's ignoring your save, you're going to have at least a minimum of a 6-up save against. It's fairly useful. Now, as we break down the stats, like your strength is sort of by the by. You've got 1 attack, no AP value to speak of on that attack. It's not very good. Like, I've used Ogrins a number of times now, and they've got strength 5, and it's just nothing to shout about. The toughness 5 is all right. You are, however, getting wounded by heavy bolters on a 4, and your 4-up save won't protect you from them heavy bolters. So I wouldn't say it's that great of a stat line. Now, what it will do is protect you a little bit more than bolters, or from bolters, because of the toughness 5. Getting wounded on 5s rather than 3s of your basic las rifles is good, and each Sentinel is worth the cost of 3 Solar Auxilia. And actually, how that stacks up with getting wounded on 5s versus wounded on 3s, it's fairly good. Now, when you're selecting this as a unit apart, a multi-laser, I wouldn't say is too incredibly useful. As a damage output, you can have it on the top of Aurochs that you might be using if it's on its own in just the fast slot. Not a great output, because you can just, for 35 points, get something that's completely immune to small arms fire in the form of an Aurochs, and a heavy bolter's only glancing on a 6. So it takes something better than what will kill a Sentinel to be able to take out your Aurochs. They are, like, for 10 points, that can take a multi-laser, and I would much prefer to go with that Aurochs. If you upgrade to the Hermes grenade launcher squadron, Hermes grenade launcher on the Sentinel, for 5 points, you get the choice between a strength 4 AP 5 blast with pinning. Pinning useful here. Like, I mean, it can go off and just get a wound through and neutralize a squad. Crack is strength 6 AP 4 assault 2. And I would have liked to see actually AP 3 here, because something that Solar Auxilia tend to lack is a decent AP. A heavier platform, such as a Sentinel that can carry heavier weights than a Solar Auxilia, it would have just been nice to see that. I know it's a grenade launcher, but it's a Hermes grenade launcher, and we get wild stats on all the different things and different rending values on autocannon. So it would have been nice to see an AP3 on there. I'm not particularly in love with that. Now, obviously, you can spam them, but I think the thing that this is most useful for is, in fact, that line on the reconnaissance. And the reason is the damage output isn't that high. However, the survivability benefits over a basic las rifle section is definitely there. Now, do I think this is game-breakingly good or something like that? No, I actually think when you compare it to, say, Solar Pattern, in which you'll get Veletaris that all have Volkite charges that are strength 5 rather than the strength 6 on the crack, but you'll get 3 of them per Sentinel, and with a better ballistic skill, I actually think it's like option A or B, roughly the same, and down to taste. The benefits of one don't outweigh the benefits of another, and a Hermes-like Sentinel squadron is still going to die to most of the things that your main Solar Auxilia force is going to die to, that being a strength 5 AP4 weapon. And that comes off in like Land Raider hull mounts. It's fairly cheap to just get on pintle mounts, and they do crop up more often than as a Marine player you would tend to think. Because I know it was a big shock to me when I started playing Solar. Even when I'd been playing Militia, I'd sort of written it off and been like, Militia is just supposed to die so fast. And then I started playing Solar and was like, oh, that critical AP4 threshold is everywhere and you just don't even notice it. So it's not overwhelmingly good. I don't think it's going to rebalance out Solar to have these in troops, especially just because it's core troops up to 6 Sentinals in a squadron. Yeah, I don't think it's going to like rebalance out Solar into the new like dominating force, but it's a nice little option to have and is very fast for grabbing an objective. If you have it as the 2 troops, obviously that limits your Veletaris to not being line. So as much as I could say, oh, it's good for jumping on with that movement 10, yes, you can run with go 13, which Veletaris and normal las rifle sections can't, so there is a benefit there. But on the flip side, your better troops, being the Veletaris, won't be able to become line, and that sort of starts to play with whether or not you even want to take Veletaris if they're not line. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Do I like the Squadron? Yeah, I actually really like the models. I'll probably end up taking them. Utility's limited in the fast slot and without line. I suppose the fast slot don't come into it. You can test it against Russes, but you want that line to really make yourself useful. So it's 50-50, jury's out. We'll have to wait. That's not the greatest coming down on the decision side on a guide. But we're getting to the Hermes Veletaris Squadron. For 65 points, you get 2 Hermes Veletaris Sentinals, Assault Sentinals, and they've got Las Pistol, Reinforced Void Armor, which gives them a 3-up compared to a 4-up on the previous Sentinal. And they are Incarusus pattern Hermes Light Sentinal. And in that, you get a Volkite Caliber, so that's the Strength 6, 30-inch range, AP5, 2 shots, and heavy Sentinel. You'll get to move and fire that because of your mechanized rule, and you've got the Storm section rule. So when selecting a unit for Veletaris Tertios, 1 Solar Auxilia Hermes Veletaris Squadron may be included in place of one of your Veletaris Storm section units. Now, because you're selected as part of a Veletaris unit, here is where I think we're going to see the utility of gaining line, and that's because the Solar Pattern Cohort gives all units within a Veletaris Tertio line. So these will gain line because it's all units in there gain line. So perfect fit. You've got a Volkite Caliber. The Volkite Caliber, I don't actually. It's okay. It's okay. It's a longer ranged gun. It wounds on a 2 rather than a 3 that your Veletaris are going to do normally. The heavy flamer upgrade, I don't see as useful at all. You've got Veletaris Storm sections that can just take heavy flamers and 10 of them for very cheap. I wouldn't ever see myself upgrading to that because you're just not going to get the weight of numbers even for an Overwatch and Wall of Death that you will see out those Storm sections that you could take in its place. However, having that movement of 8 is fast. Is 2 inches. It's just 2 inches faster, but they can run because they're not heavy, and it provides that utility to the Veletaris Storm sections or Storm Squadrons that you just don't see anywhere else. So this actually, outside of, it's not in the reconnaissance cohort, but it's in fact just in the base list, in the Veletaris Solar section. I think there's great utility here, great little unit. I actually really like the models, and yeah, this is where I will be spending my points to gain that line. Next, the Aetheon Heavy Sentinal Squadron. 70 points per. You get movement 7, so that down from the 8 of the last one. However, your save now has gone to a 2-up, and your strength is 6, toughness 6, and you've got 5 wounds, so a hefty amount of wounds, just 1 less than that Dreadnought, right? Your cavalry with heavy and mechanized as your subcategories. You've got 2 additional Aetheon Heavy Sentinels for 65 points each. Each of those can be upgraded with an autocannon for 10 points, Volkite Culverin for 10 points, Las Cannon for 20, Heavy Incinerator for 15 points, or Melter Lance for 25 points. And you can have up to 4 Hunter Killer missiles or I say up to 4, you can have 4 flat Hunter Killer missiles instead of your missile battery for 20 points. Now, what are all of those? Your missile battery is a Strength 4, AP 5, Large Blast, Barrage, and Twin Linked Assault 1. It suffers from the same problem as Frag. It doesn't ignore marine armor. Yes, it's a large blast. You can get hits down. However, it's largely going to be something that's useful against militia. Anything that allows a marine to take an armor save, or God forbid you're going to have to fire it against breaches or terminators sometimes, it's just not that useful. Whether it's worth upgrading to the Hunter Killer missile for that 20 points, for 4 single shots, I don't really think so. I think I'd stick to actually what I consider as not a great weapon because it's free along with the platform. Now, that leaves you with the options of the main gun. Multi-lasers, it's cheap to get them elsewhere in the form of the Aurochs. Melter Lances are Strength 8, Range 18, Heavy 1, Armor Bane ranged with AP 1. That Sentinel, for 25 points, plus the 70 base, 95, 2 of them gets you to half the damage output of a double Melter Dreadnought. You're about 40 points cheaper than a double Melter Dreadnought, but you've got toughness 6, 5, you'll have 10 wounds between the two at the pair of them. It then starts coming in, do you want a bit more survivability? Yes, you're not getting the 5 up save, but you've got that 2 up save that just isn't there in the rest of the list. So I can't say I'm in love with the rules of this unit. For the cost of 2 of them, I can get a Lehman Russ Vanquisher with Las Cannon hull and the Vanquisher cannon for pretty much the same points. I think it's 195 for that. So I can't say I'm in love with it because of the output. Taking damage obviously can't just be exploded easily, but it's got that 2 up save and 6 for toughness. So its bolters are going to they're not just going to be taking wounds off you like the rest of your army are. So do you know what? It's in this place where, is it good? Is it bad? Who knows? I think it's going to be down to personal taste. I would just be sticking to the Russes that I know because I know their output. But I'm open to being proved wrong. Because the comparisons to Dreadnoughts, we all know Dreadnoughts are probably too good for their points. So it's always going to be a negative comparison. They're competing for a fairly contested slot. You can't take them in tertios like you can with Russes. That sort of decontests the slot a little bit, but a squadron of Russes with plasma cannons versus Aetheon heavy Sentinels, a bit of a toss-up. As I said, not in love with the output. Would I take the Las Cannon? That's the 90 points. No, I'd be taking a Russ, which is effectively got 3 Las Cannons for the same price as 2 heavy Sentinels, which has got 2 Las Cannons. Yeah, who knows? So we've got these massive gem in the middle of the list, and 2 which I'm not so hot on. Now, finally, we're going to finish off with the Solar Auxilia Life Ward section. That's 0 to 1, 50 points. You get 2 dudes or dudettes, and they're going to be taken as a retinue for your Lord Marshal. Now, the reason you might want to do that is it ties really well into the Legiones Auxilia, because you're not then choosing between a command style section, your HQ choice, and a Lord Marshal selection. You get them baked into one, so then you don't have to take a command section within your tertios allowance. That will then free up your tertios, Solas pattern, and you can have 2 Veletaris sections and a Sentinel section, all of those working well together. Las Rifle sections not needing the lesser command ability. So that's its like sort of slot freeing up that I think is the initial which I think is the initial draw of this, even on the face of it. So we'll get into the actual stats and the weapons options. At weapon skill 4, BS4, you're the same as the pre-existing companion sections. Got strength toughness 3, yeah, 2 wounds, same as companions. Initiative 4, 2 attacks, leadership 8, and a 3-up save. 3-up save is attractive. It's 1 better than the companion sections. You've got heavy, which is better than the companions, so it's more Veletaris styled. You've got las rifles, las pistols, basic close combat weapons, which still makes me laugh that he's got that full thing. You've got heavy void armor, that's what gives you the 3-up. Refractor fields, same as the companions. Frag cracks, but you're missing the melter bombs that companion sections get. So which is a bit of a downside. Now, to balance that out, you've got battle hardened 1. And that is actually quite important. The amount of things that get to a strength 6 quite easily, it appears very often in the game because that's when things will allow rad grenades to stack to double out Marines. So people are looking for these things like Dawnbreakers, or just immediately off the top of my head, get them. Rampagers will be strength 6, and this will stop you getting doubled out by those critical assault units. Can they go toe-to-toe with those assault units? I don't think they'll trade well, but what they'll do is allow you to finish off a weakened assault unit from the legions, which is all you can ask for, really. Now, on top of the basic life wards at 50 points, you can have up to 8 additional Auxilia protectors for 20 points each. Seems all right. Bayonet's 1 point a model. I would give it a miss in lieu of the options that are coming further. So any model in the unit can exchange its basic close combat weapon for a power weapon or charnable saber for 10 points each. I do actually feel they're quite expensive. I know it tends to be costed, it seems, off the attacks, which 5 points on, say, like a Despoiler for 1 attack with a power weapon. Yeah. Because you're strength 3, the power weapons do go down in value a little bit because your power swords are wounded on 5s, your power axes are wounded on 4s. Because they're actually at a premium in the list, I still think it's an attractive option, though you're obviously not as points efficient as Marines for this role. Then up to 2 models in the unit can take either a Power Fist or a Thunderhammer, and they're both 15 points, so I think we all know which one you will select there if you're going with the best one. Or a Thunder Spear, right? I actually saw someone's really good conversions on Instagram today. And this is Redbeard Hobbies protectors that are like very much looking perfect for what I would want for my Thoracite Auxilia's life wards. And it just inspires me to do some conversions of my own. It popped up about 5 minutes ago and I was like, oh yes. So yeah, Thunderhammers, I think we know we're going for that. 1 model in the unit can take melter bombs. I think actually, I know 1 model in the unit, yes, because it protects you that little bit more of the dreadnoughts when you stack up the Thunderhammers, melter bombs here. But it's a bit of a shame they're not on the entire squad like with the companions. You've got access to the command vox, which is absolutely critical for the function of the unit. Definitely have that in there. And then finally, your Auxilia Vexilla, Cohorts Vexilla for 5 or 15 points. Here, I think you're definitely going to take the Cohorts Vexilla because that confers line. It also gives a bubble of Leadership 9. You're not going to need it because your Legate Marshal is going to be conferring that Leadership 10 anyway. So it doesn't really matter to you. Like, it's just not going to come into play that often unless they snipe both your command vox and the vox, or I suppose one or the other, the vox in either unit. But it honestly hasn't come into for me that much. People don't tend to, if they're really thinking about it, they'll pick them out. But if you're both thinking about it on that level, be hiding your vox at all times because it's something that does really come into play. Now, alternate way of doing this, take a min squad of 50 points, your Legate Marshal, no upgrades, join them together, Command Vox, leave them off the board, and then they can't be sniped for at least a turn, and then you hide them the entire game, and it's the cheapest way to get that leadership 10 just spread across your army. I do think it's a bit of a waste of the unit because it's a really fun unit, and that really is something that, as I've been reading through this book, like obviously this is the second guide, so I didn't want to jump the gun and say it on the first one, but as I've been really reading through it, I've really liked just it seems to be going a bit back to the, let's just do some fun options. And Heresy 1 very much encapsulated that. Now, obviously, there's some problems that have been coming out with the Shattered Legions, and we will get into that. I'm not going to ignore that. And that is very much a problem. But at least what we've been seeing is return to some very fun things like these Life Wards, Solar getting Sentinels of their completely own type, and just some fun interactions with like Legiones Auxilia, who knew that was coming. So it's just a great addition to the Solar range. Do I think it fixes all the problems with Solar? No, but it sort of reimagines how they're going to be used in most people's things. I think it allows, and this is with the Legiones Auxilia, it's going to allow those to be used and much more accessible to Marine players, or we'll just have an allied detachment, and then it grows into an entire army. And then we've seen a lot more Solar about, and that is only a good thing. Because a lot of the time, as a Solar player before, is like, oh, I really want to fight loads of Solar. I'll get some Solar because I'm into that as well. And then you're the only Solar player in the area. Whereas I really hope with all of these additions to Solar, which I am on the positive side about, we're going to be seeing much more Solar pop up. And the events that I think it was Harry Hollywood ran, that was Solar Militia and Mechanicum only, hopefully they can take off a lot more just in the general sphere, and we're all playing Solar together. Yes! And with that, we will catch you guys next time in a bit.